Haiti's revolution is the creation of the first black republic in the New World, born of a successful slave revolt. It's an event that scared the bejesus out of slave owners in surrounding colonies and countries like the brand new United States of America. The people of Haiti played the great powers of Europe against one another and created a nation free from slavery, the institution on which the French had built their colony there. Toussaint Louverture stepped onto the stage and played such a role that his true self mixes with legend in the imagination of the people who learn of him. For that reason alone, he's worth examining. Toussaint is worth the subtlety of historical inquiry. This is my second video on Haiti's revolution in as many years. In my previous video, I explained that I find Haiti's revolution intimidating, oh so freaking interesting that I just can't stay away. Just to hit home how intimidating this has been for me, I went back into a draft script I made in 2016, September 2016, the distant past, back when we all thought Hillary Clinton was going to be president of the United States. So yeah, times have changed, different era. And the reason I'm telling you this is because, like the Spanish Civil War, there are just a million moving parts here, a mountain of primary sources, a lot of very worthy secondary sources, which you can find in my description, and legend and even some current culture that kind of get mixed up in here. So I will endeavor to do my best. Please, while I acknowledge the historiography and navigate the sources as carefully as I can, let me know in the comments if I make a mistake or if there's something you think I should just read for the next time I cover this topic. You can support explorations like this by going to patreon.com/WilliamCFox. Every new supporter brings me fresh gratitude that I have the time and energy to chase my creativity with you. So let's go. Oh, wait, let's not go. Last thing, this isn't like a video on Napoleon or World War II, for which there are hundreds and thousands of paintings, images, B-roll. The Haitian Revolution has been subject to so-called historical silencing, as Michel Rothtriot put it in his 1995 book, Silencing the Past, Power and Production of History. There's just a lot less material explored for Haiti. There are fewer images available for Haiti, fewer portraits commissioned. Like my last video on Haiti, there's going to be a lot more of just me talking directly to the camera with you. Hope that's cool. My imaginary producer says I need a flashy chapter title to get us kicked off. I thought long and hard and came up with this. We aren't completely sure of Toussaint Louverture's date of birth. It's likely he was born in 1743, but there's a range of possibilities. Toussaint was born into what can only be described as one of the most brutal societies to ever exist, a system of bureaucratized, dehumanizing horrors that rival some of humanity's worst moments. In the same way that like a 1940s bureaucrat in Berlin accounted for hair, for tooth fillings, for wedding rings, so too did France in the 18th century attempt to bureaucratize the punishments for disobedient human property in Haiti. This attempt, called the Code Noir, an attempt to rein in the abusive punishments inflicted on enslaved people by owners, was largely ignored, and the far more brutal tactics which inspired the code continued unabated. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Modern-day Haiti is here. At the time of Louverture's birth, it was known as Saint-Domingue, a French colony founded in 1659 across the Atlantic from the metropole. By the time of the Revolution, slavery had made Saint-Domingue the largest exporter of sugar in the world and a large exporter of coffee and indigo. This built immense wealth for plantation owners and for the French mainland. 90% of Haiti's population were enslaved people. We say that again, 90%, approximately 500,000 people at the time of the revolution. Over the years, Saint-Domingue's system imported over 900,000 people as slaves. The population would not have grown without constant human importation. And that's because enslaved people of Haiti died only slightly lower than they arrived. It should tell you all you need to know. But those suffering masses began revolting in rural northern areas in 1791, and conflict eventually spread to the entirety of Saint-Domingue. Our mysterious subject, Toussaint Louverture, a freed man of color, rose to a position of military power, then, through the success of the revolt, took control of the de facto independent Saint-Domingue. Soon, Louverture would stand opposed by none other than Napoleon Bonaparte, who took control of France after its own revolution. Napoleon sought to arrest Louverture, and it was rumored to re-enslave all of Saint-Domingue. Now, let's talk about Louverture's early life. My imaginary producer and I came up with a creative title for this chapter too. Here it is. Toussaint's first experiences were on the Breda plantation. In fact, his given name reflected that ownership, Toussaint Breda. The Breda plantation was a sugar plantation, therefore inevitably a miserable plantation, given the scrapes and pain associated with sugarcane cultivation. The life expectancy on the Breda plantation was 37. Now, this plantation was absentee owned, as in the owners weren't physically there, an accepted practice for owners who, one, had gotten rich and wanted to enjoy it away from Saint-Domingue, or in the case of the Breda plantation, two, owners who had inherited that plantation knew nothing of its workings and simply wanted to retrieve its benefits from the comfort of France. The early period of Toussaint's life is a bit murky. His letters from later years and his autobiography actually don't mention that much of his youth, and there's plenty of speculation. Louverture, particularly in his early years, is a mystery that historians investigate and debate to this very day. So here's what we know mostly for sure. Toussaint was born sometime in the 1740s, enslaved at the Breda plantation, and thus carried the name Toussaint Breda. At some point, he learned to write phonetically, so must have been able to read some as well. In his autobiographical writing, Louverture tells us he regularly attended mass at church. He married his first wife around the time he was 20, and they had 3 children together. Marriage and children were a rarity among the slave population in Saint-Domingue for a variety of reasons, the most straightforward being if you have a family and give birth to a child, none of you are exempt from the slave system, so the parents remain slaves and can be separated. The children are born into slavery and can be taken away from the rest of the family. Sometime in the 1770s, so roughly Toussaint's 30s, he became one of the freed men, free black men on Saint-Domingue. Freedmen like Louverture and freeborn people of color were excluded from most political processes, but were able to acquire property like land to work upon it and, interestingly, to purchase slaves of their own. A free man, Louverture purchased his first slave in 1776. Louverture bought his wife's freedom and facilitated the freedom of his children. One transaction doesn't really appear to be in this mold was Toussaint's leasing of a coffee plantation and its slaves. After this venture failed, he went back to the Breda plantation to work as coachman. After his first wife left him, he met a second and had 2 more children. Then, Toussaint showed up during the slave revolt in the 1790s. That's it. That's really all we know with certainty about Toussaint Louverture's early biography. Here are things we know with far less certainty because they come from less credible sources, notably material published by Toussaint's son after his death, 1825. Toussaint's son, Isaac, wrote this memoir well after his father's passing and claimed things like Toussaint's specific date of birth and notably claimed their family had royal origin. Isaac claimed Toussaint's father, so his granddad, was the son of a West African king. Source 1, page 20 in the description says, quote, "Recent research, however, has been unable to find any trace. Toussaint's grandfather was perhaps a provincial governor or a royal functionary. Not super clear cut. You can clearly see hagiography and history getting all messy with Toussaint Louverture, and that's part of why I like it so much. Another shot of detail with Toussaint is the origin of his nickname. Toussaint Breda came to call himself and sign documents as Toussaint Louverture. L'ouverture, sorry for my pronunciation there, meaning the opening in French. Some say he was called this because he was always willing to compromise with opponents, so leaving openings. Louverture, or whatever the plural of that is in French, for, people he disagreed with. Others thought Louverture referred to his way of finding tactical openings in battle. Or perhaps it was the political opening for the people of Saint-Domingue that Toussaint represented. Perhaps he even came to embody a voodoo deity associated with opening or removing barriers. We don't know. Ain't that cool? What we do know is that Toussaint came back to the Breda plantation after his liberation to be a coachman, and he probably worked for a wage. But when did he learn this skill of coachmanship? He may have started his work in animal husbandry at a young age. If Toussaint had been a so-called skilled enslaved person, he would have had a different experience when compared with enslaved people who worked in the cane fields. Sometime in his 30s, Louverture acquired his freedom, that we know. How exactly did he change his station? How did he become free? We know he was officially free at the latest 1776, but we don't have the document that made that freedom possible, and we don't know why the document was created. We don't know why he was freed. There are only theories to that. So there you go. There's some things we know, some things we don't. This origin story, with all of its mystery, would be interesting, of course, all on its own, but we would not be talking about it. We wouldn't have cause to care if Louverture's status had not radically shifted after the outbreak of Saint-Domingue's slave revolt in 1791. So we need to talk about that and the event preceding it back on the mainland, the French Revolution. The French Revolution began in spring of 1789, a revolution we usually condense into popular memory to 3 words: Liberté, égalité, fraternité. News of the revolution in mainland France made its way across the Atlantic to colonies like Saint-Domingue and had an effect. The language of liberty was on the tongues of the people in Saint-Domingue, but not initially the people you might expect, the enslaved people who might benefit from a dose of liberty. It was often those who owned slaves, the white planter class of Saint-Domingue, that most loudly called for liberty and freedom. They wanted the ability to not deal with the French crown's authority from across the Atlantic, freedom to treat their slaves however they damn well pleased. I like how Charles Forsdyk and Christian Heusberg put it, quote, "The local planter class were soon to find out trying to make a elite revolution from above in the name of liberty while presiding over the most obscene form of tyranny imaginable was to prove easier said than done." But it wasn't just the white planter class versus enslaved people. Freedmen and free people of color also agitated for equality during this period. But again, not for the implicit meaning embedded in the phrase, quote, "free and equal." They wanted parity between themselves and the white planter population of Saint-Domingue. Like the white planter class, most free people of color did not seem concerned with the abolition of slavery, the injustice and violence inflicted on hundreds of thousands of human beings. It's hard to know what the enslaved people were thinking while planters and freedmen of color agitated for their own version of liberty in the French Revolution. We do have the account of one Frenchman observing the news of the French Revolution and the effect of that news on enslaved people in Saint-Domingue. Quote, "Our chief concern is with the impression this news has on the slaves. We have omitted no necessary precaution for keeping them within the bounds of obedience." A little bit later in the same letter, quote, "We are acting in the presence of 450,000 slaves who are perhaps only waiting for the first sign of division among the whites to throw themselves in the most terrible uprising." Yeah, good call. The white planter class feared that a slave revolt was coming. The Colonial Assembly wrote an opinion after the outbreak of the revolt, quoted by both Laurent Dubois and Madison Smart Bell in their book cited below. Quote, "We did not fetch 500,000 slaves off the coast of Africa to bring them to the colony as French citizens. They didn't enslave them so they could be free. That's something the slaves would have to do for themselves." And so they did. The slave revolt on Saint-Domingue broke out in August of 1791. Across the north of Saint-Domingue, plantations burned and violence crescendoed. The rebellion was concentrated in the north, which was soon blocked off from the rest of the colony by colonial troops. Even if the uprising had failed, Saint-Domingue's revolt was the largest North America and the Caribbean had ever seen. I saw 50,000 initial participants in my research. Another source put it as high as 100,000, and that number obviously grew with time. The demands of the revolt weren't centralized or agreed upon, and we can't extrapolate for every participant based on limited evidence. One surviving dictated letter of rebel demands has framed how we understand the moment. The words of a rebel in September 1791, quote, "We are seeking only one dear and precious object, freedom. We lack neither gunpowder nor cannon, so liberty or death." In the fall of 1791, Toussaint Louverture joined the band of northern rebels in the mountains. They were led by Georges Biassou. We don't know the details of how Louverture got into the group, but once he was in, he rose through the ranks. Biassou would command and oversee Louverture for the foreseeable future. At this point, things appear more like a waiting game for the planter class. The rebels had been weakened by counteroffensive measures, and they lacked provisions. They lacked military equipment, and most of them formal training on how to use equipment even if they had it. So the authority strategy was clear: defend cities of the north, block the roads out of the north, and wait for reinforcements from France to arrive. And this moment, this waiting game, this is the moment Toussaint Louverture first appears in the public consciousness. The end of 1791. Rebel leaders, including Louverture, feeling momentum stall, decided to cut a deal, a controversial deal, to end this whole revolt. As our first record of Toussaint Louverture's public leadership, his involvement with this deal is worth dwelling on. The basics of the deal were negotiated by rebel leaders with Saint-Domingue authorities and commissioners sent from France. It said one rebel leader threw himself at the feet of the commissioners and begged forgiveness when negotiations began. In exchange for ending the rebellion and sending everyone back to the plantations, status unchanged, the rebel leaders and their families would gain their freedom. For Louverture, already a free man, this meant freedom for his close family members still in bondage. Now, notice that this deal negotiated for the extremely limited emancipation of some of the revolters. There's not only no provision in the agreement for a general emancipation of the slaves who revolted, in fact, there isn't any provision for the rebelling slaves, other than get back to your plantations. No emancipation, no improved working conditions or accountability for violent ownership, none. The rebel leaders and some of their families are freed. In exchange, the colonial authorities get status quo antebellum, which is pretentious for saying that things go back to everything like they were before the war. So, how did Toussaint feel about this very limited deal? Louverture was, according to one account, the largest advocate of this course. Return white prisoners in the rebellion. Keep slavery. Here's that account, a white prisoner who witnessed the rebels debating how to negotiate. Quote, Toussaint of Breda, braving all danger, accepted to save us. He represented to him that we could not and ought not to be thus sacrificed. Nonetheless, the deal failed. The revolt went on. Fighting continued. The theater of the ongoing war is the stage from which Louverture began his true rise from a supporting role in deal-making to a battle-tested leader. To rise to political power, you must surpass others. So let's talk about the first two guys in Toussaint Louverture's way. Above Toussaint, the rebellion leadership were Georges Biassou and Jean-François Papillon. To outsiders, Biassou was the top of the rebellion, but Jean-François commanded a force of roughly 6,000 and operated all on his own, often attempting to wrest control of the entire rebellion. One author simply described both Biassou and Jean-François as, quote, formidable. For Louverture, rising to prominence meant rising above these two men. For the moment, he was, according to one account, only Biassou's aide-de-camp. He had a long, long way to go. A more pressing question for us than his title and rank at this moment was, what was Louverture fighting for? What was he fighting for in general? What was he telling his friends, his enemies? Why was he there as the rebellion hit its one-year anniversary in summer 1792? What was his raison d'être? That's pretentious for reason for being. It's also French, which is very topical for this video. At this moment, Toussaint Louverture was ostensibly fighting for the King of France. In the midst of France's revolution, some of Saint-Domingue's revolutionaries justified the rebellion by saying the King of France, Louis XVI, wanted the conditions of the enslaved people improved. He was advocating, some argued, better working conditions, more time off for slaves. Now, fact check, King Louis XVI wasn't doing any of that. But people like Louverture, loyal to Louis, might have argued the king was on their side. The white planters of Saint-Domingue, the people resisting the slave rebellion, they were the ones, therefore, resisting the King of France. Okay, but fact check number 2, this was during the French Revolution. King Louis XVI was in prison and on track to the guillotine. So resisting or not resisting the King of France seems a little irrelevant. And while these rebel leaders were posturing their support of the King of France, news of his arrest was sailing across the Atlantic, as were thousands of reinforcements to restore order to Saint-Domingue. So upon realization that their public cause, the King of France, was undermined, the rebel leaders turned to somewhere else. Where else could they turn to? Yes, of course, to Spain and Spain's king, Charles IV. But why? The Haitian Revolution is already so complicated. Why does the Spanish king need to be here? Okay, so look, Saint-Domingue, what we call Haiti, was the western portion of an island. That island also contained the Spanish colony of Saint-Domingue. Marooners, smugglers, news, intrigue, it all seeped through this porous border. While the Spanish Empire had maintained official neutrality towards the Saint-Domingue Rebellion in 1791 and 1792, that position of neutrality softened just a wee bit after the beheading of King Louis in Paris. Because seeing your neighbors kill a monarch is scary to other monarchs. Like, what if regicide is contagious? So what did Saint-Domingue's rebels think of this new interest from Spain? Well, with Louis XVI dead and French troops coming to put down Saint-Domingue's rebellion, rebel leaders, including Toussaint Louverture, decided their best prospects actually did lie with changing allegiance. Fight for Spain? Fight for the Spanish king? Why not? Por qué no? The Spaniards gave these rebels a king to fight for, but most importantly, military training for continued disruption of French rule in Saint-Domingue. Now, all of that complication is part of the reason why you don't hear much about the Haitian Revolution. It has a lot of moving parts. Louverture joined a rebellion that rose out of the most intense human oppression imaginable. That revolt could only last so long. When the King of France failed to intervene because he was beheaded, Louverture and many other rebels turned to the Spanish king. They suddenly claimed loyalty and dedication to the Spanish crown. Maybe they were sincere, but maybe they just needed an ally. So if you're lost in the thicket of details here, just think about the rebels of Saint-Domingue. They just needed to survive. The rebels were probably ready to latch on to just about any power to prevent the need to surrender. Ideals or emancipation were clearly secondary to just continuing the rebellion. However, let's talk a little bit more about emancipation. Alongside the French reinforcements that arrived in Saint-Domingue in 1792 were 2 commissioners sent to navigate the politics of the very, very complicated island. One of them was Commissioner Sonthonax. Here he is realizing the one receipt he needed is not among the other receipts in his possession. Sonthonax was young and fascinating. Léger Félicité Sonthonax, despite the fact that he was sent by France to end a slave revolt, was in fact an opponent of slavery. The other commissioner sent by France, Etienne Polverel, was also an abolitionist. So France sent 2 abolitionists to put down a slave rebellion. That's some 5D chess. It wasn't that long after arriving on Saint-Domingue that Sonthonax and Polverel realized that subduing the entire rebellion was pretty unlikely given their limited forces. And just annihilating all the rebels probably wasn't that, productive long term if you want to have a colony eventually, or something reintegrated into the French Empire that isn't just a pile of rubble where everyone hates you. And in addition, by the time these 2 commissioners arrived, it wasn't just enslaved people acting up. In Saint-Domingue cities, various social classes of so-called big whites, little whites, and free people of color were agitated as well. See my video on Haiti's wider revolution for explanations on all these classes and groups. To top off the chaos, in June of 1793, Sonthonax and Polverel faced a white rebellion in Le Cap and were forced to flee. Backed against the wall, Sonthonax initiated something that would change everything. Sonthonax and Polverel needed help, so they instituted a new policy. To entice assistance against the rebel whites in the city of Le Cap, Sonthonax and Polverel offered freedom to any slave that would come to their aid. Quote, "We declare that the will of the French Republic and of its delegates is to give freedom to all of the Negro warriors who will fight the Republic under the orders of the Civil Commissioner against Spain or other enemies, whether internal or external. Come fight for us. Your freedom awaits." The ploy worked. Enslaved rebels came to the aid of the French commissioners, and order was restored in Le Cap. Okay, well, Le Cap was burned to the ground by fires, but they restored order over the pile of ash. And seeing how well this all went, restoring order in the pile of rubble that was Le Cap, Sonthonax and Polverel continued to offer emancipation from slavery in exchange for helping them in the cause of the French Republic. But they had trouble bringing over a large number of rebels, and this was due in part to the most notable holdouts to turn down this offer of emancipation for help, Biassou and Jean-Francois, the 2 rebel leaders outranking Toussaint Louverture. Toussaint didn't jump at the offer either. He was drifting, and like Biassou, continued to affirm his loyalty to the Spanish king. Knowing what we know of Toussaint Louverture, he may have been stewing with a bit of anger, indignant at Sonthonax. Why would he be mad at Sonthonax? Well, Louverture had joined a rebellion and climbed its ranks. To survive, he had advocated compromise with the colonial authority, freed white prisoners, and joined the Spanish to get supplies and training. In contrast, this Sonthonax guy sailed onto the scene a couple years later and started freelancing massive decisions like freeing enslaved people, a boon to his ever-increasing popularity. A white commissioner from metropolitan France was upstaging these black rebels. Perhaps not coincidentally, this is the moment when Toussaint Louverture started his pivot. Dare I say, his transformation into a powerful political figure. Here are Toussaint Louverture's most famous words, quote, "I am Toussaint Louverture. You have perhaps heard my name. You are aware, brothers, that I have undertaken this vengeance, and that I want freedom and equality to reign in Saint-Domingue. I have been working since the beginning to bring it into existence, to establish the happiness of us all." As if to put a bit of emphasis on the idea that he should be lofted ahead of Sonthonax in the public eye, he adds, quote, "I was the first to favor a cause that I have always upheld." In other words, not only am I a more authentic proponent of liberty, I was first. A little later in the letter, Toussaint again confronts the growing popularity of Sonthonax and the French Republic as beacons of abolition, égalité, fraternité. Louverture writes, quote, "You don't know the state that France is in. They can't give you any news except what they make up to support that party. Oi, this Frenchy Sonthonax is freelancing. Those of us fighting with Spain are the only ones who can really help you, and we've been here since the very beginning of the rebellion." See what he's doing? Quote, "I am Toussaint Louverture. You've perhaps heard my name." This letter is Toussaint Louverture bursting onto the stage. From an obscure youth in an amorphous leadership role in the early revolt, he was addressing now the people using his own name, his own chosen name, using his own rhetoric to take on Sonthonax. A little back and forth was developing. Now, Sonthonax, he had another move, one that would put the rebel leaders, under immense pressure and help drive Louverture's complete political transformation. After Louverture's proclamation that he only wanted, quote, freedom and equality to reign, Sonthonax went a step further. He, without permission from the French government, proclaimed general abolition. All slaves on Saint-Domingue were free. Slavery was theoretically abolished on Saint-Domingue by Sonthonax, this one single dude. It was a Friday. Sonthonax's Emancipation Proclamation read in part, quote, "The Republic, the French Republic, adopts you as its children. Kings, aka the Spanish king, aspire only to cover you in chains or to annihilate you. All Negroes and mixed bloods currently enslaved are declared free in order as to enjoy all the rights attached to the quality of French citizen." This is a huge move by Sonthonax, risky, and even just describing it as freeing the slaves is understating it some. You are all not only free, you are French citizens, fraternal equals, just as the revolution in France has promised. So, everyone get on the Republic's bandwagon. Let's go. Again, so says one dude, Sonthonax. This proclamation was promulgated throughout Saint-Domingue, and of course it arrived in Santo-Domingo, the other half of the island, to be read by rebel leaders like Louverture to add pressure to their continued rejection of the French Republic. Commissioner Sonthonax, for his part, got really lucky with his proclamation. I mean, he didn't have permission to abolish slavery. That wasn't his instructions sent with him from France, but he just declared abolition anyway. However, coincidentally, in February 1794, a delegation he sent arrived in France at just the perfect moment to explain what he had done. Now, you'd think that this delegation sent by Sonthonax to France to basically be like, hey, we went well beyond the parameters of our instructions. You'd think that they'd get some sort of punishment, right? You'd think during the French Revolution, they maybe would get the punishment of a strict telling off. Right? If there's a punishment more associated with the French Revolution, please do comment below. I've never heard of it. So you'd expect this delegation with a message from Sonthonax that basically said, hey, we kind of did a thing. We freed all the slaves on Saint-Domingue. You'd think that would be met with some animosity back in France. But it wasn't. The deputies were acclaimed by the National Assembly. Sonthonax's Emancipation of Saint-Domingue was not only accepted, the Assembly voted to end slavery throughout the entire French Empire. Again, one move, one vote, boom, done. Slavery declared over, not just in Saint-Domingue, but the entire French Empire. And why did they do this? According to sources, the Assembly didn't even debate before taking this monumental vote. I actually don't have a great explanation for you. It was a revolutionary assembly during one of the biggest revolutions in world history. I think they were just in the mood. If you got primary sources that would say otherwise, do leave them for me in the comments. Sonthonax's neck was literally saved. We have to be careful now about assigning agency in history and saying, look, here's one great man who changed it all. But look, Sonthonax was a guy with an instinct who made a gamble at the right time. Every enslaved person in all of France's colonies were declared free and equal, all at once. Pretty wild. On a serious note here, there are people rightly pointing out in the comments that the French Assembly did not free the slaves of Saint-Domingue. They rubber stamped a rebellion that had already taken place. The revolting slaves, they're the ones that had freed themselves. They have agency. Now that's true, and even if the status of slavery in Saint-Domingue was a bit up in the air, and even if rebel leaders like Toussaint Louverture were a bit wishy-washy on the idea of abolition, this general emancipation, 1794, was an administrative cap on events set in motion by the Revolt in 1791. Historical agency is important. By the way, Sonthonax was lucky, but he wasn't super lucky. His unilateral abolition didn't go completely unpunished. The authorities in France also saw fit to recall Sonthonax for this. It basically was like, hey, Sonthonax, great idea, freeing the slaves, great job, buddy, wonderful, you're fired. Thus, Sonthonax leaves our story, never to return. Never. So here's a question. If Toussaint Louverture was true a friend of liberty as he claimed in his letter to the people of Saint-Domingue, did he join the French Republic again after hearing of the general abolition from France? Did Louverture immediately ditch the Spanish king and rejoin the French? Well, it seems Louverture had already started to ditch the Spanish for other reasons. Then he learned of the general emancipation from France. The exact moment and motivation for his departure from the Spanish side is still a topic of historical debate. Whatever his precise timing or reasons, Toussaint clearly sensed the direction the wind was blowing, back to Republican France. And so, in turning coat against the Spanish, he took up the rhetoric of liberty. We also know that Toussaint's rise to power was limited as long as he stayed with the Spanish. The presence of Biassou and Jean-Francois meant that with the Spaniards, he would always be outranked by somebody, unless they died. To leave the Spanish was to make his own way. He had stepped onto the stage of Saint-Domingue, and now he began to play a leading role. Once he rejoined, Toussaint Louverture proved an extremely valuable asset to the French. Most immediately, he controlled an army and a territory of Saint-Domingue on behalf of Spain. By simply switching sides, so too did his multi-thousand-man army and the land they stood on. France's forces, decimated by disease, needed all the help they could get. Representing the French Republic on Saint-Domingue at this turning point was General Revolt. Louverture and Revolt would have a good relationship for a number of years. They wrote many nice letters to one another as they planned military assaults, and Louverture actually bailed Revolt out from an attempted coup. Revolt not only relied on Louverture strategically, but he seemed to have genuine reverence for him, declaring him the Black Spartacus. Later, this compliment was backed up with a new title, Lieutenant Governor, a formal government position to accompany Toussaint's military role. Louverture reportedly yelled at the ceremony, "After God, Revolt." He once wrote to Revolt, quote, "I cannot think of you without shedding tears. Toussaint is your son." This general governor sent from France and this rebel, they clearly got along. But alas, things can never be simple with the Haitian Revolution. Sonthonax declared slavery ended on Saint-Domingue. France backed him up, ending slavery. They recalled Sonthonax anyway for disobedience. Meanwhile, Toussaint Louverture joins the French Republic and cozies up to France's new governor in Saint-Domingue, Revolt. All is going very well. Louverture is out of the shadow of Biassou and Jean-Francois. He's got influence and legitimacy. But here's the thing, when Commissioner Sonthonax got back to France, he was exonerated. After justifying his decision to emancipate without permission from France, Sonthonax was recalled from his recall in 1796. He was sent back across the ocean to Saint-Domingue to help govern. The story just zigs and zags, doesn't it? So when Sonthonax got back, he was immensely popular. He was, in the eyes of many, the father of Saint-Domingue emancipation, and many literally called Sonthonax father. That's how much reverence people had for the guy who declared slavery over on Saint-Domingue. But there was one problem with all that. When Sonthonax originally left for France, Louverture was a nobody. But now, months later, Toussaint Louverture was a somebody. He controlled the largest force on the island, commanded the admiration of many, a man who had taken up the rhetoric of liberty and the mantle of the French Republic. And now, Sonthonax was back, a man who personally embodied these ideals right alongside Louverture, the man who declared emancipation in all of Saint-Domingue. Sonthonax was popular and clever. In short, he overshadowed Toussaint Louverture. And from this point on, Louverture's ambition and gamesmanship show clearly. Two men now, Revolt and Sonthonax, stand between him and true power. Watch closely what he does. In 1796, there were elections to the French National Assembly and its upper chamber. To be elected as a deputy would mean leaving Saint-Domingue and sailing back across the Atlantic to France. In other words, it meant getting off the island and out of Toussaint Louverture's way. And who did Toussaint Louverture desire to stand as a candidate for deputy in the National Assembly? Why, none other than one of the most powerful men in Saint-Domingue, Governor Revolt. Louverture urged his friend Revolt to stand for election to the assembly. He wrote something that could be seen as wholesome and imploring, quote, "General, my father, my benefactor, forever the true friend of the blacks. We love you. We need you, Revolt, representing our interests, just not here, of course, but far away in France. Please, please, we love you so much, please leave." To this gushing message, Louverture added he hoped, quote, "Nothing disagreeable will happen to you, as I would not wish to bear the pain of being witness to that. I would desire that you should be named deputy, so you can be sheltered and not the pawn of the factions which are gestating in Saint-Domingue. Go, friend, go. It's not safe for you here. Don't worry. I'll take care of things while you're gone." Now, it's true that Revolt wasn't perfectly safe on Saint-Domingue. Yeah, it was revolutionary Saint-Domingue, plenty of violence, but these two military men had been navigating the craziness of the island together. Why the sudden shift to concern about an unfortunate, disagreeable incident? I might be reading too much into it, but let's be real, Revolt didn't need the hard sell anyway. Having spent years in Saint-Domingue, he was probably tired. He accepted this nomination and election, and he left for France. And he did pretty well too while he was there, serving as a steadfast advocate of Saint-Domingue for years in the French Assembly. So without a lot of drama, General Revolt was gone. One gone, one to go. Sonthonax remained. As soon as Sonthonax was back as French commissioner in Saint-Domingue, he and Louverture had problems. Many of them were personal. The two men came from very different backgrounds and had different dispositions, but on top of personal animosity were policy differences. How could Saint-Domingue best rebuild in the aftermath of the rebellion? Was there a place for white people on the island, particularly those white people who were slave owners prior to the revolt? This white planter class also happened to be the people on the island with the most financial capital, so not really that easy to just disregard and say, go away. And Louverture saw this. He saw a role for white planters in Saint-Domingue's future. Sonthonax, on the other hand, even though he was white, Sonthonax did not, and so their most notable disagreement centered around the return of white planters to an island these planters had once dominated in the most cruel way. When Toussaint Louverture facilitated the return of some white planters, Sonthonax questioned his revolutionary bona fides and then threatened him with imprisonment. When Louverture decided to act on this tension, he showed up in the Cap in summer 1797, had a series of private conversations with Sonthonax, in which he told him in no uncertain terms, "Get out of Saint-Domingue." Toussaint recalled the details of the conversation later to allies, and really we only have his side of the exchange. First, Toussaint accused Sonthonax of setting the factions of Saint-Domingue against one another, and then abandoning ship. Quote, "The other time when you came here, you caused the Civil War and caused so much French territory to be turned over to the English and the Spanish, and then you left us, and you left us nothing but trouble." That's a grand reinterpretation of what happened. We know that Sonthonax was recalled to France after he tried to abolish slavery, not because of territorial losses. And losing territory to Spain? Hello, Louverture was fighting for the Spanish. Louverture then accused Sonthonax of wanting to declare independence from France. Quote, "Recall when you proposed independence to me." Well, that's a major accusation. Treason to the French Republic? Sonthonax, you came here, you messed up, you left, and then you even talked about declaring independence from France. Oh my goodness, boy, you're gonna be in some trouble. Yeah. Yeah, they're gonna be in trouble? Yeah, big trouble, big trouble. Louverture's description of this exchange with Sonthonax in summer 1797 goes on and on and on. Pages and pages of likely embellished conversation. Louverture accuses Sonthonax of bad things, and then Sonthonax says something to the extent of, "What, me? Bad things? Why don't you like me?" Toussaint concludes by telling Sonthonax, quote, "You must go. The salvation of the colony requires it." Starting a civil war and declaring independence from France were pretty steep accusations. To back his claims, Louverture brought not evidence, but a threat. If Sonthonax did not leave voluntarily, Louverture would bring a force of 20,000 to the Cap to force the commissioner to depart. Sonthonax was intimidated. He boarded a ship and returned to France. So, as of August 1797, Biassou and Jean-Francois were out of the way. The Spanish were back on their side of the island. General Revolt was off in France. Sonthonax was scared off. So by the year 1800, Toussaint Louverture was in charge of all of Saint-Domingue. And that is the moment Toussaint Louverture came to power. Right? Toussaint was Saint-Domingue's governor Louverture. He could set policy and rule the whole territory. That's power. There's just one little thing. Louverture had pledged his allegiance to France, and Saint-Domingue was still a French colony. Louverture sent representatives and letters to France to assure them of this colonial status. He bore the colors, the red, white, and blue, and the language of the Republic, and had gotten pretty good at it. But, he had also gotten pretty good at flying the colors of the Spanish king and speaking well of this person in 93 and 94. He gotten pretty good at speaking the language of the French monarch and his benevolence at the start of the revolt in 91. So where were Toussaint's words and where were his actions? There was one guy at the time for whom the question was less curious and more pressing. In November 1799, Napoleon Bonaparte came to power in mainland France. There he is. And fun fact about Napoleon, you might not know this about the guy. Bit of an ego, didn't like to be upstaged. No one in front of Napoleon. Look at this footage of him pushing a child out of the way to get on the Waterloo water slide in San Bernardino, California. What a menace. So as Napoleon consolidated his grip on the French Empire, his attention slowly turned to someone who seemed to be blatantly challenging France's authority in one of its richest colonies, Governor Toussaint Louverture. In 1801, Louverture stuck his neck out there, put his foot down even firmer. He published a new constitution for Saint-Domingue, one which made him governor for life. There were rumors that Napoleon was planning to come to Saint-Domingue and reinstitute slavery, and that helped motivate Louverture and the whole island to get this constitution rolling. And Louverture's publishing of the constitution helped convince Napoleon, in turn, that this governor for life in the French colony had bigger plans, namely independence from France. After all, he was acting as such. A conflict between these two was brewing, a showdown between Napoleon and Toussaint Louverture that will probably make for its own episode one day. But here's the question we have to answer. When did Louverture really achieve power? When he achieved his personal freedom from slavery? What could be more powerful than that? When he freed family members, when he participated in the revolt, when he navigated the ejection of rivals, the big moment he became governor of all Haiti? In my opinion, the passage of the Constitution for Haiti, a little over a year into the 19th century, was the moment Toussaint came to power. The 1801 Constitution, for all its difficult subtleties, enshrined the abolition of slavery in its text. Quote, "There can be no slaves on this territory. Servitude has been forever abolished. All men are born, live, and die there, free and French. So Louverture's personal influence was used to codify a freedom earned by the masses. This man, who had helped lead the slave revolt against colonial France, ejected 2 other empires, the Spanish and British, and eventually consolidated the entirety of Saint-Domingue, this man, who emerged from the shadows of slavery, now wrote confidently and conclusively to none other than Napoleon Bonaparte with news of his constitution for his quasi-independent country. It was a fait accompli, a done deal. No choice but to accept. Listen to this quote from Louverture's letter to Napoleon. Quote, "This constitution was received by all classes of citizens with transports of joy that will not fail to be reproduced when it will be sent back bearing the sanction of the government. Greetings and profound respect." The text is framed submissively, but it's not submissive. It's an expression of power. Listen here, Napoleon. Everyone here already loves the Constitution, so please go ahead and sanction it because, well, what's your alternative? Everyone loves it. I'm governor for life of Saint-Domingue. I operate a separate foreign policy, control and send home French commissioners. Napoleon, what are you gonna do? Mic drop. And that is how Toussaint Louverture came to power. If you appreciate content on underrepresented stories like this instead of, the military history industrial complex out there, join my Patreon. And if you're as hooked on Haiti as I am, check out my other video on Haiti, Heads Held High, Happy Warriors. Later, y'all.